Well, howdy, y'all. Did I get that right? Does that sound pretty good? I'm very glad to be here, to see you all, and to begin this journey with you here at St. Michael. It has been a long time coming, and I am thrilled. On behalf of my family and me, I want to thank all of you for the warm hospitality and the welcome that you've given us over these last few weeks. I want to thank especially all the effort given by the Search and Transition Committee. You should be very proud of all the work that they did. They put your best face forward. I'd like to thank the vestry members and all of the leadership, the guilds and committees that I've met just this last week. Everyone has been so happy to help me learn more about St. Michael. And so thank you. But now, I want to get down to the business at hand, the business of Jesus. Now today, we come into a very special time of the year, a time that I love a lot because we hear story after story after story in the Gospel of Luke. Luke tells great stories. In fact, I bet if I were to ask all of you to tell me a story from the Bible, perhaps name your favorite story from the Bible, I bet 4 out of 5 of you at least would tell a story from the Gospel of Luke. The gospel writer weaves great narratives, and they stick with us, and they help to teach us how to live our lives. But these stories come sort of in rapid fire succession in the gospel. And so before we get into today's healing miracle story, I want to look in context at where this story falls with the other stories in this section of Luke. Before today's story, we hear the story of the fig tree. And then after today's story comes the story of the mustard seed. I want to take both of those stories, see if we can glean something out of those that will help us understand today's healing story. First, the fig tree. The fig tree is a tree that was planted in a garden and tended by the gardener for 3 years, yet the tree never bore fruit. And so the owner of the garden came to the gardener and said, "This tree is obviously not going to do what it's supposed to do, so cut it down, throw it out, let's start again." But the gardener, who knew that tree, who cared for that tree, asked the owner if the tree could have 1 more year. And so the owner agreed, and the gardener saved it for 1 more year. Following today's story, we hear the story that you likely know well, the mustard seed story. It's a very short story where the seed, the mustard seed, so small, the smallest of seeds, if planted in a good spot and nurtured well, can grow into a large tree and care for the birds of the air and the animals of the ground and everything around it. Both of those stories are stories of promise. The promise of potential, but also the reality that sometimes that potential is not realized. If we take those truths, the truth of the promise of God, and we feed it into today's gospel story, I think it gives us even better insight. Today's gospel story is about a woman who comes to the synagogue on the Sabbath, and Jesus is there, and Jesus has been teaching. And Jesus sees this woman obviously hurt, obviously in need, obviously looking for some relief, hunched over and in pain. And Jesus has a choice to make. Either Jesus can heal this woman or ignore her need because it is the Sabbath. And the rules of the Sabbath say one cannot do any work. Healing would be work. And so Jesus is faced with a choice that I'm sure was not a difficult decision for him. And so Jesus heals this woman. She stands upright. And then immediately he gets lip from the leaders of the synagogue. Immediately he is criticized for doing work on the day when he is not supposed to work. And so he fires back, calling those leaders hypocrites, for they would come to the synagogue looking to thank God for the blessings that they have received, yet deny blessings to this woman in need. Now, we could approach this story in many different ways. Perhaps we could approach this story as a miraculous healing. A miracle. It's a good approach. It's amazing. It causes us to wonder. Or we could approach this story by looking at the criticism that Jesus received from the leaders of the synagogue. Perhaps start to flesh out what it means to be in leadership and the rules that we put around ourselves, the boundaries that keep us in a very small space without the creativity to see something different. But I want to invite us to consider a different part of this story, one that you may have missed when you heard it read just a few minutes ago. Here we have a woman who comes into the synagogue, obviously in need, and Jesus chooses to heal her. Yet she did not ask to be healed. It's unspoken, but she did not ask for this. Yet Jesus did it anyway. She did not ask to be blessed, yet Jesus did it anyway. Now, why would she not have looked for Jesus' healing touch? Perhaps she knew it was the Sabbath, knew what the rules were, and was willing to live inside those boundaries, knowing that no good rabbi would do any work on the Sabbath. Or perhaps she didn't know Jesus at all. Maybe she hadn't heard stories of this man who was doing these miraculous things around the country, and so she had no idea to even ask for his help. Or perhaps, and I think this might be the deepest truth for all of us, perhaps she did not believe she deserved the healing. Perhaps she did not believe that she deserved that special treatment, the touch of Christ. Who was she to be healed by Jesus? When we experience the profound truth and presence of God, it changes us. When we experience the profound truth of Christ, we cannot help but be changed. It is that experience that we receive in a place like St. Michael. And it is that experience that people out there are so hungry to receive themselves. As I begin this journey with you, this new journey together, I'm reminded that a church is like a mighty river, strong and fast. And each one of us comes in and out of that flow on our way. Very few of us ever see the beginning or the end of that mighty river. But even if we are able to see the beginning and end of the mighty river of a parish, we are all part of an even bigger system, an even bigger river of faith that has flowed well before us and will, God willing, flow well after us. We come in and out as caretakers, as travelers in that flow. In fact, here in Texas, we are certainly inheritors of all the work that has been done for generations and generations here in this state. I've been trying to learn a little bit about Texas because I'm pretty sure Texans love it when you do that stuff. And so part of my learning of Texas is a reminder of a story that I heard many, many years ago of a Disciples of Christ horseback preacher who rode across North Texas in the late 19th century, spreading the good news of the gospel of Christ. Now, this horseback preacher, back in the late 1800s, came from the east and looked for communities that needed to hear about the good news. And he found one community in a Native American area, and there they built a chapel, and every Sunday he would come and he would preach. He would tell the good news and tell stories and preach to these Native American community. But there was just one catch. In this Native American community, they would give him 1 hour to preach. At the end of 1 hour, they would get up and leave, whether he was finished or not. And right behind the pulpit was a clock, so that they knew exactly when that hour was up. And this frustrated that little preacher. He was so frustrated because all he wanted to do was spread the good news of Christ. And these people would just get up when the hour was over. And so after one Sunday morning, being frustrated again, he thought he knew how to outsmart them. So he took the clock from behind the pulpit and he put it on the back wall of the chapel. He knew he could solve that problem. A week went by, he showed up on Sunday morning, And as he entered the chapel, he found they had turned every chair around to face the back wall. You know, it's hard. It's hard to tell the story of Christ. It's hard for each of us to have the courage in the face of simple bumps and big problems to continue to tell this hopeful, generous, loving story of Christ. I'm reminded of how difficult it is every day because on the shelf in my office sits the Bible that horseback preacher used in North Texas. He was my great-great-grandfather. That man does what each one of us is called to do as well. But you see, it's gotten a little harder. Our world is not as hungry for that truth as it used to be. At least it doesn't know it is. The people out there that we run into every day are no longer actively seeking something that goes beyond what they see in front of their face. Our opportunity and responsibility has gotten much bigger in our modern world. It is harder and harder to tell this story, but perhaps the need is as great as it has ever been. We inherit the traditions that have come before us. We inherit the mantle of the work that has been done, and that opportunity becomes our responsibility. That responsibility is great, but with Christ, all things are possible. You see, remember the woman who came into the synagogue in today's gospel lesson. She did not ask for the blessing of Christ, yet she received that blessing anyway. Whether we ask for it or not, Christ blesses us. When we enter this place, we receive the blessing of God. It rests on us. It changes us. And as we leave these doors, it is now up to us to carry that blessing out into the world. Over these next few months, I invite you to dream with me, to imagine what St. Michael might do in the future. God is speaking to us. So listen. Listen to what God is saying to you. Help discern. Say your prayers. Be re-inspired by what God is doing in your life, and then tell one another. Tell your neighbors. Tell your coworkers. Tell me. Together, God will do new things in this place again to meet the needs of the world that have become so huge. We have the power of the Spirit inside us. The power of the Spirit, the strength of the Spirit, the courage of the Spirit to change the world around us into the world that God hopes it to be. That opportunity is now our responsibility. God has chosen each and every one of us to be here, to be blessed, and to do the work to change the world. Thanks be to God. Amen.